Our plan will be the most significant new investment in our infrastructure in Canadian history.
Who can be against infrastructure spending? I'm Brian Lilley with TheRebel.Media. Justin Trudeau made a big promise on infrastructure spending, and he did it in a way that might make you think he plans on spending a lot of money to fix Canada's roads and bridges, start big construction projects, the things that most of us think about when we even bother to think about government infrastructure programs. I mean, look at him. He's standing at a construction site. He's surrounded by men and women in hard hats and those orange vests. He's standing in front of heavy equipment, and he's promising to spend lots and lots of money.
We will invest $60 billion new dollars over 10 years, nearly doubling the current government's planned investment.
Well, don't buy it. It's not happening. Why? Well, because first off, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals won't win this election, but more because what he's promising isn't more roads and bridges, the kinds of federal government infrastructure projects they've historically been involved in. Now, Trudeau is calling it infrastructure. He's saying he's going to invest in infrastructure because he knows Canadians like government spending on those kinds of programs. But what he's actually talking about? New social spending. Trudeau's plan calls for spending in three areas: public transit, social infrastructure, and green infrastructure. Most of the things he's promising to spend federal tax dollars on fall well outside of federal jurisdiction. Let's look at some of the details. Public transit infrastructure. A Liberal government will more than triple federal investment in public transit over the next 4 years. Over 10 years, we will quadruple it. Public transit. You know, that's mostly a municipal responsibility. Yes, the current Conservative government also funds local public transit. A mistake, in my view. I mean, this should be left up to the provinces and municipalities. They have the ability to raise their own taxes, and they're constitutionally responsible for it. But under Trudeau's new plan, well, he'll spend $60 billion over 10 years, and 1/3 will go to public transit. Another third will go to social programs, essentially. Trudeau calls it social infrastructure.
We need to invest in social infrastructure, in things like affordable housing and childcare. Our communities cannot grow without them. Those same communities cannot be expected to shoulder the costs alone, and a responsible federal partner should never expect them to.
Now, do you define childcare and affordable housing as infrastructure, or are we talking about social programs here? Trudeau is hiding nearly $20 billion worth of social programs inside an infrastructure program. You can claim you're building the infrastructure for the daycare spaces, but that just means the funding for running them on an ongoing basis has to come from somewhere else. And my bet, it's coming from this program. Oh, then Trudeau promises to spend $19.7 billion on green infrastructure.
And finally, we need to build sustainable infrastructure. That means investing in clean energy, but it also means adapting to climate change. The infrastructure we have now, built for us by our parents and grandparents, has served us well, but it was built for a climate that increasingly no longer exists.
What on earth does that mean? Well, let's look at the documents. Quote, green infrastructure. A Liberal government will provide dedicated funding to invest in a broad range of projects, including but not limited to local water and wastewater facilities, climate resilient infrastructure, clean energy. You know what? This sounds an awful lot like the Ontario Liberal policies of Dalton McGuinty. I mean, they even promised to fund this by issuing green bonds and selling them to investors. But the reason it really sounds like Dalton McGuinty's Ontario likely has to do with this man here, Gerald Butts, often called Trudeau's right-hand man. Now, he designed the green energy plan that saw Ontario promise 80 cents a kilowatt hours for solar and wind power, when hydro and nuclear power was going for pennies per kilowatt hour. He's the man responsible for pushing power prices through the roof in Ontario, and he wants to do the same for the rest of Canada. No surprise, after Butts left the Ontario government, he went to work for the World Wildlife Fund's Canadian office and called for an end to all oil and gas being used in Canada.
Truth be told, we don't think there ought to be a carbon-based energy industry by the middle of this century. That's our policy in Canada, and it's our policy all over the world.
Good luck heating your home. Of course, that would also actually mean getting rid of plastics for things like the beloved iPhone that Butts walks around Ottawa muttering into. So this is sold to Canadians as an infrastructure plan. It's not. It's social engineering, and it will not boost the economy without the ongoing influx of tax dollars, which isn't really a boost to the economy, it's just more government spending. And yet Justin Trudeau says he'll keep running deficits if elected, but just until 2019. Can you believe him? In the 15 budgets presented while his father was Prime Minister, there was only one balanced budget. That was in 1969. In 1970, they promised a small short-term deficit, but by the time Pierre Trudeau left office, the deficit was $32.4 billion. Adjusted to 2011 dollars, that's about $71 billion. The only Prime Minister to have a higher deficit, Mulroney, in the first year after he took over from Trudeau, and then he started peeling it back. The mess that Pierre Trudeau left Canada in terms of deficits and the expansion of social programs, well, left us in a deficit position until 1996. Justin Trudeau's plan isn't one for building Canada, for investing in infrastructure. It's a plan to pour a ton of money into cities for public transit and then spend the rest on social engineering. To call it infrastructure spending would be a lie, and to say that it will get us out of deficit, well, that is just living in a dream world.